Hello there! Today we're going to be looking at the massive scenario Destroyer of Worlds for Alien RPG by Andrew Gaska, published by Free League. This colossal offering is the sequel to their launch title, Chariots of the God. However, it isn't necessary to play that one before you dig into this, as the link is quite tenuous. This scenario will take you anywhere from 10 to 20 hours to get through, and akin to a chapter campaign instead of a typical one-shot, being played over several locations, and I would break it up into about 3 sessions, using the 3-act structure, one for each session. The backdrop of this scenario is the icy moon of Icarius, an oil-rich world that has been exploited and put into rapid decline by the United Americas, or the UAAC, for decades as they plunder the goods of the actual moon. With the looming invasion of the Union of Progressive Peoples, or the UPP, a full evacuation is in effect to salvage what assets can be moved off-world. In charge of the UAAC, Colonel Myers employs a burnt earth policy, destroying the oil caches with an oil-eating bacteria, leaving the moon worthless. The mood on the moon is tense as the UAAC leave and the exploited locals are left to their fates under the new management of the UPP. Many, however, are already helping the attackers with an active insurgency force among the locals that has hampered the colonial marines for years. As such, the city is a dangerous place where loyalties are never quite clear. This cinematic scenario is the first taste of players to jump into the skin of the famed colonial marines as they take on the role of a hastily assembled unit. Drawn from a roster of troop ships in orbit, here to refuel before heading off to other hot zones along the border with the UPP, the marines are assembled, personally selected by the brass for being the best of the best. The mission is a manhunt for 4 marines gone AWOL with classified information. The group will have to track them down on the moon as they try to sell information to the UPP via the insurgency on Icarius. Team Charlie, as the players are now known, will have to eliminate the marines and secure that stolen information. What's really going on here is the top brass, Colonel Myers, has struck a deal with the Weyland-Yutani, and the upper brass has been trying to weaponize alien species with the corporation under the broad term Project Lifeforce. Now threatened by the invasion of the UPP, they have been forced to move their assets off-world, a risky task as the 4 Special Ops Marines known as the Sin Eaters, our plucky AOL Marines, were unfortunate to find out, as they were impregnated by facehuggers when escorting a cargo that went wrong. Using a developmental substance, they were inoculated by Project Lifeforce scientists with various degrees of success. These 4 Marines fled the base, hoping to bargain with the resistance for what is inside them, forcing Myers to ground all transport, halting the evac, and ordering up the manhunt to find the wayward Sin Eaters, before the UPP come knocking on Icarius' door. We are treated to a glut of grunts to choose from, and they take on the various tropes that you'd expect from an Aliens film, but I have to say many of them are just not very interesting, and with muddy and similar images, they do tend to blend together somewhat and are pretty forgettable. Their agendas are likewise not the most inspired. I get the artist was going for gritty and the lived-in look, but it doesn't mean the basics of creating strong, distinct visuals should be forgotten. The actors on the set of Aliens got to personalise their own marine gear and make themselves and their personalities stand out from each other, so they were visually different at a glance. This could have been employed here and wasn't. The only one to buck this trend, ironically, is the soulless android. Here, he too is a bit of a peace-loving android trope, in the same vein as Bishop, but he also harbours a second personality, as an evil, experimental hyperdyne combat synthetic called GL is hacked into him to keep an eye on the group and clean up afterwards, GL being the personal bodyguard of Colonel Myers. This is androids done right, and I love the intrigue of this storyline that it creates and the mistrust that the android has in various parts of the story. On a side note though, Chaplin's background has massive spoilers, and the players will have to read it to pick their PC, which sort of ruins a lot of that intrigue and annoyed me no end, as some of the players got some spoilers and knew not to trust Chaplin, even if it was on a meta level. This information should have been presented on the new story card function, as the information on the sheet definitely something which shouldn't happen at all and was a massive oversight. Act 1 opens with a briefing by one Major Hatfield. The players are given their mission and set loose in the sub-level staging area of Fort Nebraska. Here they will find their battered APC that is being refueled, and they are told to tool up. This is a candy shop for the players to stuff the APC like a turkey, and they will get to mess with cool toys like smart guns. I would also include the players' possibility of learning that there is tactical nukes on offer, but they would have to sign these out and only with the permission of Colonel Myers. Have him floating around this area with some mysterious crates stacked waiting for the space elevator to come back down and be unloaded. This will show the players Myers, who they need to get to know a little bit, and clue them into some more possible solutions later on, as the crates and the tactical nukes are foreshadowing. I would even open the briefing on the way down to the fort on the space elevator, showing the world from a bird's eye view and the fleets in orbit as they descend. Act 1 is a standard investigation to track down the 4 Marines. They leave Fort Nebraska and will likely start the manhunt at the closest of the 2 leads they have, which is a dive bar called Oblivion. Travelling through the city, make sure to play up the environment as the bitter cold bites at their skin, and you can use the blizzard condition event several times here to make sure they keep that in mind. Lastly, before they leave, have Hatfield ask for them to give a sit rep at the top of every hour to make sure they are on track and keeping to their objectives. This will give you, as the GM, some input through Hatfield should they need a push in some direction or the other. And it also gives you an idea of keeping Myers in the back of their mind, as he can be heard in the background or interrupting and cutting Hatfield off several times and keeping that need-to-know basis alive. Build him up as a bastard and give the players a chance to get to know him. He is a pivotal character in the story, however he rarely gets seen until the very end. At the Oblivion bar, they will meet the owner, Fee 2, any other synthetic in the area, and they'll learn from her or several other people in the bar that the 4 were here and met with an insurgency member called Ivan Stalls. Not a lot more can be offered here, but since Fee 2 is sympathetic to the UAAC, I'd fill them in the resistance in the area, offering up the name of their leader, Botas, should they press on the point of the resistance and open up the idea that Fee 2 is on their side. This will plant seeds for her being a refuge should they need it later on in the scenario. There is also a nice little subplot brewing here with Fee 2 and a pilot called Eddie, who is sitting getting drunk as her ship, the HMS Magpie, is grounded and being stripped at the airport. Fee 2 is running an underground railway of sorts, trying to get civilians off the planet, and the players might try and link these 2 elements to help out. Make sure that you play Fee 2 as fearful of the patrons of the bar, as she is unsure which patrons are loyal to whom, and have some of them slink out should they overhear the conversation to tell Botas, the insurgency leader, that its kill team has come after his prizes. Ultimately, the conversations in the bar will lead to them finding out the stalls and one of their targets has been taken by the Marshal, and they will most likely head there next. I would also introduce a couple of elements outside or near enough to the dive bar to open up the map and offer some other options and directions for the players so they don't feel railroaded at all. Namely, I would use both Have You Heard the Word and Eckford's dog catchers, especially if anyone waits in the APC rather than going into the bar. I had the preacher paste leaflets onto the windows of the APC to make it harder to see out of, and the group easily accosted him and found out another 2 of the AOL Marines were spotted at San Rocco Medical Facility. A third is having Eckford cut off the APC route so they can have a little chat. Eckford is the standard Weyland-Yutani representation in the zone, and she is looking to catch the 4 AOL Marines. Eckford is a bit of a double-edged sword for the players, but does offer them a second way to possibly achieve their goals and learn some of what they need to know about Project Lifeforce. If you feel your players will shoot instead of talk first, I would have them turn up later after they have gone 3 rounds with something more sinister and are worse for wear and feel like talking rather than going another 3 rounds with Eckford and our friends too. The starport is the second lead you will leave the fort with, and there's a lot of storytelling to be done here with the lockdown of the ships and the angry mobs gathering trying to get off the planet. You can push home the desperation of the civilians against the UAAC and the growing ties with the insurgency and the local population. There are 2 ships here, the HMS Magpie, whose reactor lies in pieces being repaired, while its pilot drowns her sorrows in the Oblivion, and the USS Monaghan, which looks like it would offer some future solutions to the players' many problems. But if they ask the brass about using this asset, Myers will blow it up and blame it on the insurgents. The players need to be focused. There's a few events that should pop up here, and I recommend what goes up. Corporal Wright and Eckford's dog catchers yet again, if not used. Having Wright appear here is a pretty much default position, having her in the crowd and asking about getting off the planet. She could see the players and turn herself in here, or likewise she could tail them after they leave. Having Eckford and her dog catchers here offers a second option with interacting with Corporal Wright, having them catch her, or being used as a bargaining chip to get information out of Eckford about Life Force, turning her over alive. If the starport is the last on your players list, I would have the crowd already rioting and the bomber being used liberally, as well as the event Ambush and showing off those UAAC soldiers going through the crowd with smart guns and tanks. You can also have them acquire the event location acquired from the insurgents within the crowd here and head them off to the Act 1 finale at the Insurgency Compound, where I would already have Wright stashed if they hadn't come here before that. In all likelihood, your players will probably skip the Spaceport entirely as it's out of the way and other leads are more appealing. The players should head over to the Marshal Station sooner rather than later, as this is one of the first leads they will acquire from the Oblivion bar and a few other places, and it is where the shit will really start to hit the fan. It does offer up Private Reese, one of the AOL Marines, albeit dead and under the name John Doe. The Marshals picking him off the street as a drunk and left him to rot in one of the cells in the holding area. The Marshals also have picked up one Ivan Stoles from the AOL meet and greet at the Oblivion bar the night before and is currently being interrogated. In the interrogation with Stoles, the players can learn that the insurgents have Sergeant Wachek and are looking to hand her off to the UPP at the old oil refinery. I would throw in a bit of info about the insurgency here from the Marshal's database or Stoles themselves before everything goes to hell, keeping it right with the players in their heads and making sure they know who is who. While in the database, they can also discover a few more interesting nuggets of information, picking up the UPP chatter on the airwaves, talking about the delivery, and seeing some aerial imaging of the old refineries themselves and seeing the activity there, filling in some of the larger picture. Lastly, we go to see Reese, and of course he is dead in the holding cells, and a newly gestated drone is waiting for the players as they arrive here. This is a tense fight in a close space, and use of overwhelming force to take it out. At least one of them is going to take some friendly fire. Remember that the drone is above the door leading into the bullpen, and not the door leading into the cell. It will come down behind them, cutting them off in the area. Play it for all the drama you can, and make them bleed. The medical facility should be next on the Marines hit list, given the heads up by the preacher on the street. However, should they not engage with this event, you can have Hatfield drop the tip on them to check out, or have it flagged in the Marshal's computers to check on later. San Rocco is understaffed and lies mostly empty, with everyone and their mums trying to leave this bloody moon. The population has dwindled somewhat, but evidence of Wozchek and Carvalho can be found here, as they both registered in for a medical treatment late yesterday afternoon. Wozchek is gone, taken by the insurgency, but Carvalho is still here, begging a doctor to take this thing out of his chest. He is about to go into surgery as the PCs arrive. The players can face down the Doctor, who will defend Carvalho with the Marine's own pulse rifle. Talking him down is the best bet and shouldn't be too difficult. This opens up some information about the missing Wozcheck as well. The good Doctor telling them all about her abnormal blood work. Where she is now? He doesn't know. She checked herself out. Oh dear. Luckily, down the hall, shot up, is one of the insurgents who does know. Seems like every bugger knows this secret compound and who's in it and who isn't, so the players are bound to find out sooner or later if they aren't careful. When all is said and done, the chestburster will erupt from Calvaro and will have to be taken down. The hospital is a bit empty here, and I did fill it up somewhat so there was more witnesses to the xenomorph encounter. This led Chaplin, influenced by JL, Colonel Myers' pet android, to murdering everyone who's seen the aliens. Good times. Why all the Marines went along with it? Who knows? Having learned the insurgency is hanging over Wozcheck at the old oil refinery, and she is in possession of a bioweapon, the players will most likely make a beeline for it, as it sounds like a time-sensitive mission, and this is their first major combat encounter. And in all honesty, it's not hugely interesting, especially since the next location, Insurgency Compound, is much the same but more dramatic and interesting. On top of that, there's literally nothing to be gained here other than the coordinates of that compound, should they not kill everyone on sight, that is. They may take a stealthy approach, but this will soon come to an end as there's quite a few eyes for them to get spotted. A massive combat will erupt eventually. A couple of my players stopped the APC on a hill and opened fire on the facility once everything went wrong and their friends were running out the building. They wanted explosions, and that's what I gave them. You could spice up this encounter with the arrival of UPP shuttle landing or taking off and giving them the option of a real target to cut loose the APC weaponry on. But all that said and done, doing this gives the UPP more menace and makes the stealth more dramatic, so I would probably do this if I were to play this again. If short on time, I would skip this location altogether and go right to the compound, learning that the handoff has been delayed for some reason, probably heavy blizzards. If played out, however, I would introduce that blizzard condition and intro Dante's little friend here with acid reflux event at the most awkward time possible to really wrench up the tension and use that last Act 1 event. Once players have the location of the compound, make sure they know it's heavily guarded and Hatfield needs to be informed. This is where things get really cool, and the Colonial Marines send them a Cheyenne to pick them up. They are going to head-on assault to this base through an airdrop. There's about a dozen or so insurgents in the building, including their leader Botos, who can actually become an ally once everything goes south. But right now the insurgents are fleeing as the players rappel down from the dropship into the compound like the badasses they are. Unfortunately for them, the insurgents are actually running away from something else. Wozcheck. She is transforming into a body burster and is killing anything she can see and piling them up to create a nest. Botos and his trusted men are making their escape through a secret tunnel in the living room, and they shouldn't be much of a problem unless the PCs wander into them. Our PCs have a lot of firepower at their disposal, but even so, this might be a tough one, unless they ask the pilot to light up the building first, which will not please Exford should they be loyal to her. Once inside, they're confronted by the Bodybuster in an epic end of Act 1 battle, leaving them with a laptop telling the insurgents to take cover as operations are a go, and all hell breaks loose. If right is still not used, she can be placed here, and this is what I ended up doing, and despite her trying to be useful, my players shot her dead. So be warned, you may sow a little bit too much distrust. As we head into Act 2, the skies are falling as the UPP invasion begins in earnest with the event The Storm. The moon is under a heavy assault, and Hatfield has one last message for the team before static is all they hear. Continue looking for the AOL Marines, then rally on Fort Nebraska. Hopefully the players have tracked down most or all of the AOL Marines, as now this is more of a wild goose chase set in a war zone, and the rewards for finding any of them after the invasion is not worth the time investment. The locations are updated as followed. They're pretty much all destroyed. If they go to any of these locations, only the Oblivion bar will be mostly intact, serving up UPP troops and loyalists in the open as they celebrate the start of their invasion. The San Morocco medical facility has been hit by an airstrike and is mostly a smoking hulk. The Marshal Station is destroyed, and the starport and the oil fields are taken over by the invasion forces as staging points. Before anything, check the agendas and the story cards and hand out any story points for any achievements the players may have. This is only really interesting for Chaplain as he is freed from JL's influence and can open up about what's been going on. There's a reminder to the GM for this with the mandatory event restart. This is a bit of an expedition dump, but it does it in a cool way. My concern here is the exposure to all the Project Life Force shenanigans and JL's influence. Myers might be starting to look more like a villain a little too early on, and they might not want to go back to the fort, trying instead to escape using the starport. This didn't happen for me, but I have a feeling in my GMing bones that it might cross the players' minds from time to time, so be aware of it, and if they do head that way, I would have them bump into the tank crew, heading back from the starport after it's been taken, telling them it's been overrun. This is the event called It's a Tank. Getting the AOL Marines now is such a worthless task. I would try to put them off going after anything unless it's on the way to the fort, as I feel it will be ash in their mouths and it will drag them around the map and kill the pacing of the game. Otherwise, have most of them try to get to the players or have them mentioned by other NPCs in passing. There are several allies we had here now that everything has gone to shit, and most of them are eager not to die and find safety in numbers. Eckford, Botos and Wright will all try and join up with the Marines. Have whoever you feel is good for the plot join up and use them as cannon fodder as they walk through the streets and the warzone heats up. With a Cheyenne at their disposal, it is likely they'll try and use it, but it's going to get shot down in the warzone where they will be hounded through the street by the synthetic combat units David 7 as they're on the warpath with the UPP. Using the event, the UPP are on the hunt. They should make good their retreat to Fort Nebraska and will encounter several small events on the way to describe the carnage and the war zone they're walking through. I feel these are a little light and there could have been a few more interesting options, and it would have been nice for the splash of colour events to have a story card as well. This event is best played out in the middle of doing something else to make it more intense, and this is where Dante's little friend starts to become a little bit more active. I had this happen. Players were inside a stolen ox and they were being chased through the streets by the UPP in their own vehicle. It made it a tense scene as the driver weaved through the tight streets avoiding the shots, and the gunner tried to retort with his own returning fire, and then the screams started in the back seats. It was a really good intense scene and the players really got involved and invested in it. The players can link back into Fee 2, the owner of the Oblivion bar, as a side plot with the refugees trying to get off world, and pick up a whole load of trouble and responsibility along the way. But they will be able to resupply here from her caches as well, as a nice little bonus. However, the Oblivion bar is not en route to the fort from the compound, so it's unlikely to happen unless forced by the GM or the players really want to help out. But remember that the bar is crawling with UPP troops now, and it's going to be a very big hazard should they make their way in that direction. Play up the majority of the civilians cheering the arrival of the UPP and throwing rocks at the Colonial Marines, and have them point out their positions to the hounding troops which are on their heels to really push home that they are the people who are not wanted here. But also show a few UA loyalists in the mix being harassed and killed by the invaders and loyalists too, using the event, the executions, if you want to burden your do-gooder Marines with more people to protect as they gather an ever-growing group and head off to the safety of the fort. This is a short and brutal act and should test the Marines and their tech to the limits. Make sure they rest up some when they come in sight of the fort to reset their HP and stress levels, and then hit them with the end of Act 2 event, Falling Skies. Describe how a colossal EMP is released from orbit and blasts into the city. Dropships and fighters start to tumble from the sky, and all of the Marines' vehicles and equipment start to pop and crackle as their circuits blow, leaving only a muted silence where once a raging battlefield was. As Act 2 comes to a close, once again address those story cards and agendas, with Dante and Chaplin being the most pressing, with desperate, serious personal threats to themselves looming in the background. In my group, Dante was one of the backup NPCs, and when she started convulsing, Mason instantly shot her, seeing her as a threat to his group and fulfilling one of his own agendas. Interestingly enough, everyone seemed to be a little bit shocked at this, but they got over it pretty quick. We open up Act 3 with another attack on the city as a massive, ominous ship moves through the upper atmosphere and unloads another payload. This time, black goo is thrown down, much akin to the film Covenant. Who does this? We are left in the dark in that, and we're going all J.J. Abrams on the mystery box. The shockwave rips into the group, and if they don't get to cover, they have a chance for infection. Ironically, Mason, our group, who just shot Dante, and had a good think about what he did there, as he was handed the infection card. Each location is updated again, but God help you if your group is still going after the remains of those Marines and not fleeing for their lives. I'd restrict their movement at this point, to be honest, and tighten the noose, forcing them into the fort. With abominations now roaming the streets, they will be overwhelmed otherwise. If Eckford is still alive, she can try and guide the group wanting to get to her bug-out bag on Sublevel 3 of the Bastion at Fort Nebraska. This is outlined in the event Let's Make a Deal, and even the UPP Synthetics might offer some help here with their own event where they team up with our Marines called White Flag. If you're keeping track of all this, that is a lot of allies this party can get, and I would suggest starting to thin the herd with abominations from the city. And with that, the group makes for the fort. The abomination events that are available here, Table for One and Can't See the Forest for the Trees, are two of the starting ones I'd use to start whittling them down, and telling the story of what the Blackout is and does. A nice foreshadowing for those that are infected and now have worm-like creatures swimming in their eyes. Getting into the fort is not an easy task, and the group will have to bypass a ring of automatic sentry guns and scale a perimeter wall unless they can come up with a decent plan to get in. The book offers several suggestions, from running the gauntlet to using one of the 2 tanks available in the city that you may have encountered earlier in Act 2 or seen at the starport in Act 1. And there is always the pipelines, which is probably the best option as it's the most thematical for the oil-rich world. And what game would be complete without getting into a pipe? This can be signposted by the event Safe Haven, offering a downed dropship as a respite before going into the fort and an easy way in. Once inside of the fort, the grounds of the base are destroyed and all is quiet here to start with. And this could again be used as another respite area should the Marines come in a different route. But there are some finds to be had here that are fairly useful, especially that the radiation is now coming into play and all those Nooks didn't fare too well in the bombardment. If Mason is still around, have his CBRN alert him to the radiation and the motion scanner for some of the things lurking in the debris. Searching the grounds will also turn up the end of a good Marine event to come across the fate of Major Hatfield if you want to show him, and they can grab his ID card for opening the doors within the Bastion. Other than that, digging in the west wing will find a way into Sublevel 2, bypassing a good portion of the base. In less shorter time though, I would discourage this option, as Level 2 is quite a bloodbath as well. If the players are messing about outside in the parade grounds too long, evoke the Ready to Rumble event. That will bring Xenos and Abominations into the base. Show them fighting together, and where they are passive to the group, any interference should see them turn their ire onto the actual Colonial Marines as well, and herd them inside the Bastion, forcing them to barricade themselves in. The Bastion is split into 5 levels, and there is clear objectives here for the Marines to follow to get the space elevator working again and get off the moon. They'll be required to do one of 2 things: restart the reactor in order to reboot the base AI called Apollo and convincing it to open the docking clamps, or just getting down to the space elevator and trying to free it by gunning the engines. I would add that there should be a way to manually release the actual clamps on the space elevator going into the actual tunnels of the base, and you're looking for the maintenance shafts and doing it manually, taking a full shift to achieve, much like repairing the engine. This would force the Colonial Marines into the docks along with the aliens, and should be some good time, but it only makes sense to give them this option as well. If the Marines aren't taking the rubble way down to sub-level 2, they will come into the Bastion on level 1, and there's not a lot to do here unless events are offered. The first thing, however, they'll find when entering the Bastion is they'll be confronted with the alien architecture, as the aliens have started to create a hive here, and in the resin they can find a no-named major and his ID card if required to open up the other levels, again cutting down on some of the problems they'll come across. If they miss this ID too, and Hatfield outside, you can use Acid is Your Friend events to bag one of Ripley's bad guys and have it eat through the floor to the next levels to allow access. Otherwise, they're going to have to cut through each door with blowtorch, and it'll take a while. Upstairs on level 2, we will find the mainframe, and plugged into it is GL, Meyer's combat synthetic bodyguard, and this is where we tie up Chaplin's story. He will be activated by her and taken over yet again. I'd also allow any David Simmons present to be taken over here to add to the dramatic effect, as she turns Chaplin on the group and makes him attack them, all the while he is pleading that he is sorry. This is an excellent scene, and this will wrap up most of the loose ends of the actual plot. Jael is most likely to die here, as they will probably just open up on her and try and kill her outright to stop the madness without killing Chaplin. But if not, she is actually an excellent ally and knows a lot about the facility and what is going on here. Down on sub-level 1, we find the staging area we started on in the first place. This doesn't hold very much now and is mostly Smoking Hulk, but it is an open space which is prime for a few events. Who Hunts the Hunters, Bundling Up, and One of Us, should Dante still be alive, are excellent to be placed here, and these deliver a ramping of tension and some new blood should you need some PC replacements. Below that, on sub-level 2, we find the reactor and a ton of aliens, including our first queen, a charger. And also we find the best part, tactical nukes. They will need some hazmat suits if they wish to be safe here on this level, as it is flooded with radiation, but there is a lot of them to be offered about the base, so they shouldn't be too hard to find. Here they will need to deal with the threats and restart the reactor so they can access Apollo, the Bastion's AI. There is also a way to build the reactor to critical mass if they wish to do this, or they can set the timers on the nukes. With the Queen Charger down here, 2 of my players took this option and stayed to witness the show. It was pretty beautiful. There is also a way onto the elevator on this level, as it spans both this level and sub-level 3, and it offers a good escape route should they wish to set the nukes or the reactor, but that all depends on the group holding up the space elevator and waiting for them. My group did not, and left without them. If the players are smart here, they can also be a bit stealthy, but the Charger is no joke, and it will take a lot to bring it to its knees. If any of the Marines hit stage 2 of the infection, however, they could be useful down here, clearing out some of these aliens. And the clever player, playing Dante, may also just walk past the aliens, knowing that none of them will harm her with the chestburster inside. So make sure you use One of Us before this level and you drop that hint. Down further yet, we get to sub-level 3. This is the crux of this story. It is here that all the answers are dished out, and we can tie up every single loose end. Eckford, if she makes it this far, gets her stash. Any Marine that needs treatment can find it in the medbay. But if they're taking their time, I'd start to crack them open and pop them chests one by one, and start with the NPCs, but make sure Dante's Bursting with Joy event isn't too far behind. There should be an element of haste around the Bastion, and if there isn't, feel free to push that button. If the players have been paying attention, they should realise the solution to save them from the chestbursters is the same solution that screwed up the AOL Marines in the first place and isn't exactly stable. The book tells you that anyone that takes it will turn into a bodybuster in one shift. But there should be a slight hope. It worked for Corporal Wright after all, and on a die roll of a 5 and a 6, on a d6, I would say it should work as advertised. If they check the cold storage, they will also find dozens of frozen aliens waiting to be boarded onto the space elevator, which should clue them into a few things, and I would absolutely use the event Colonel on Ice. If JL is with them, she will open it, but I would also have Eckford open it too if she is present. They are partners after all. This is the last of the loose ends, and he is infected with a chestburster, using it to go unharmed among the drones. He is now wanting off-world, and will not let anyone touch him to extract it until he is somewhere safe. Whether the group goes through all the hoops to get the AI up and running, then freeing the doping clamps, or heading right down and just gunning those engines, they will have to get aboard this damn elevator at some point and getting off this hellhole. 2 of my players were left behind, dealing with the chargers. The nukes went off below. The ones left on the elevator felt pretty smug with themselves indeed, until they actually checked the cargo bay. Within, the main prize of Project Life Force is fully stocked away and on board, and the Queen sits on her throne producing eggs, surrounded by our albino workers, as they excrete resin and sculpt their hive. This was one of the most epic and cinematic scenes you will get yet, and it was brilliant. The Queen sits there like nightmare fuel in the middle of this huge expanse as they slowly climb up towards space. My players went to action and started firing on the Queen straight away as a distraction, and only the heroic efforts of Chaplin, redeeming himself by using the bodyguard trait, took a lethal hit for his captain and was eviscerated, tailed by the spiked tail of the Queen, letting another of the party run towards the back doors and open them, blasting everything out into space. You can try and move quietly past the Queen as she drops more and more eggs, adding to the tension of this fight to come, as the players eye up the blaster door button. If Myers is here as well, he is infected and he could also be useful for blasting everything out to space, being less likely to be attacked by the aliens themselves, as they're all passive here until something goes wrong. But I feel the Queen would ultimately understand the threat from both of these and deal with them directly. After this epic scene, they are greeted by the space and the aftermath of a massive, catastrophic space battle. Ships lay strewn in wreckage as they move among the stars. They will need to suit up and reach one of the EEV pods to survive until pickup, if someone comes along at all. One giant leap later, and they are all safe. I would add that to get this far and to fail the jump to the EEVs did leave one of my players a little salty after all the effort they went to get here, so be aware to allow them a little bit of a respite between the Queen and the jump perhaps, or just end it after the Queen is dead. But just be aware that some of the players might find that a little bit annoying, despite the one that actually died loving it. In conclusion, Destroyers of World is a entertaining and whirlwind of a ride. It is a good showcase of what Marines are all about, and has a lot of amazing scenes, and is a well-forged story as well. But overall, this is a very girthy pack, and it gives you a lot of contents for your money. You are getting a huge expansive story and a lot to do when you're down on the planet. The players will not be disappointed once the action starts. I would say that the city could be a bit more lived in and feel like it has a bit more of a breath of life, but that is down to the GM, I suppose, to add that to it. Adding to that, I would say that the Pregens do need to be a little bit more interesting, with only Dante and Chaplin being quite interesting and with good motivations, and the others being, again, a little bit bland. The art inside is absolutely astounding, and there are some great scenes to be had. The box set is well worth picking up in physical, and I also picked up the Roll20 module as well, which I cannot recommend, unfortunately, as it's fairly poorly done and is not worth the money, and you get a better deal just getting the box set and using the free PDF and uploading it yourself. You'll get pretty much the same thing, and perhaps even a bit more care given to it as well. But with that said, it was a great time that we had and a huge setting to explore and survive through. I'm sure any Alien fan will have a great time here. And with that, make sure you like, share and subscribe if you enjoyed this video and want to see some more aliens in the future. I will see you again next time.